Hello everyone, how are you going? Welcome to the stagnating economy of Canada, something that I find strange to single out given the entire world's situation at the moment, and so why is Canada so far behind?
This is Canada, the second largest country in the world and one of the most interesting economies that we can research today because of the problems it is facing. On the surface, Canada might just look like any other advanced economy. It has a relatively high standard of living, high incomes, advanced industries, and an advanced financial system to keep the whole thing going. But beneath the surface, Canada is plagued with a range of macroeconomic issues that have led many economists, and even the OECD, to believe that it will be the worst performing advanced economy in the coming decades.
Wait. He said coming decades, but I want to read that again because he said the worst performing advanced economy over the next decade and the 3 decades after that. That is a massive amount of time. Like you go 40 years ago, we're in the 80s. You think about all the things that have changed since then, and that is the same period of time from the 80s to the 2020s as the 2020s to the 2060s.
Now, these are some big claims, and I have to say as always, nobody can predict the future, least of all economists, but that doesn't mean the concerns that these organisations have raised are not genuine. At the very least, they can teach us a lot about the challenges that we will face in our own economies because, while Canada might be the hardest hit by these issues, everybody else will by no means be immune. And yes, that includes their neighbours to the south. So, why is Canada projected to be the slowest growing advanced economy for the next 5 decades? Will these issues impact all of our economies? And is there anything that can be done to fix these problems before they start to seriously impact the citizens of Canada?
Geez, well, it certainly sounds very doomy and gloomy for Canada, and I'm wondering why it is in particular Canada. Why not Australia? Why not the UK? Why not the USA, for instance? I mean, I can only hope that it is going to explain why Canada is the hardest hit based on whatever factors, because to throw out there and say that they're going to be the slowest growing advanced economy for the next 5 decades, that's huge.
Once we've looked at all of that, we can put Canada on the Economics Explained national leaderboard.
Okay.
Canada is both blessed and cursed by its regional position. It is blessed because of its proximity and cultural closeness to the largest economy in the world, a connection which has made it the United States' largest trading partner. It has also got access to both the Pacific and Atlantic Ocean for even more international trade opportunities, all while being very protected in a nice, peaceful part of the world. Unfortunately, its position also means that most of its landmass is uninhabited tundra, and its population is highly concentrated in just a few urban centres close to the southern border, and close to that much larger and much more dominant economy. Now, geography is not the reason that Canada is in trouble, but it could make a lot of its problems worse, so remember this for later on. The real problem is that Canadians just don't make as much as their American peers. I mean this in the sense that average salaries in Canada are lower, but also the average Canadian just does not make as much stuff as the average American.
I mean, I guess it makes sense, but it's a funny little analogy because now I'm just imagining a Canadian and a USA person just racing, doing up bolts or something like that. Just anything that they can make, they're just doing it 5% faster. And look, it certainly makes sense that the geography is both a blessing and a curse for them. They are so isolated, so they're just away from everything else, be it good or bad. Let alone the fact that they are just such a massive country, the second biggest country in the world, but so much of it is just uninhabitable and kind of unusable, so you don't really have as much land as maybe even the USA, for instance, because you don't have the people spread out to even use it to then have manufacturing and mining and all those things, just building your economy more.
Part of this gap is pretty easy to explain. Americans just work more hours than Canadians, so they have more time to produce more value for their economy. But even adjusted for working time, Americans are on average more than 30% more productive than Canadians. The average American worker produces $66 worth of value per hour, whereas the average Canadian only produces $50 worth of value per hour. So, why is this? Too many of those workers' rights, too many poutine breaks? Such a large gap is actually quite hard to explain.
I don't even know how you would possibly just come up with those figures in the first place. How do you possibly go, okay, 345 million people divided by however many hours equals 66, and then you go 37 million divided by however many hours equals 50. I do not understand how you can possibly come to a number like that when you're dealing with scales and numbers and everything else that large. I mean, I do find it interesting that they work more hours. I guess that comes down to amount of holiday, most likely, because I'm fairly sure that the US only gives, a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, but I think it is only a week, and I can only imagine Canada is going to be like Australia, and then the UK is above us, but at 2 or 3 weeks, I believe?
A lot of economists assume that this gap was caused by the different industry makeups of the US and Canada. America just has more high-income industry centres that pushes the national average up. For example, there is no real Canadian equivalent of Wall Street or Silicon Valley. If this explanation was correct, it would also mean that this difference is pretty much meaningless, because a few standout value adders pulling up the national average isn't really giving much insight into the experience of most participants in the economy. The OECD has since found out that even on a per-industry basis, Canada still falls behind the US in terms of productivity, so the high-performing industry excuse doesn't really hold up. The real reason is that the US just invests a lot more into making their workers more productive. To produce anything, we need the factors of production: land, labour and capital. You can make your labour more productive by making your population younger, better educated and healthier. Land is more productive if it's close to water reserves or rich in natural materials. And capital, which is simply things like machinery or infrastructure, becomes more valuable the more that is invested into it.
I mean, that's a very simple equation in that regard, but it's interesting to hear that, like you said, the USA just puts more into it per capita. Because even though he is throwing out numbers that they are 30% more productive, and even within each industry they are also performing it in a more productive way, I would love to know just how different is it when you actually just go the medium and don't just include these top dogs in there.
It's also important to consider that improving any of these factors will have positive impacts on the other two factors. For example, if a country finds a better way to manage its farmland, it can support a higher population of younger workers. If it has a bigger population, there will be more people to make more innovations to improve capital. And capital is instrumental in making land and workers more productive.
And it is such a compounding effect as well. Like all of these things, you increase one and then all of a sudden it's just flowing into the others and then they just increase each other and then it kind of such a quickly exponentially grows. And that's what we're seeing now with things like Silicon Valley and Wall Street, especially with the introduction of all these AIs and robots and all these different things that are just making people step back from the labor jobs and then just put their brains to use. And so you just have so much growth because the work is taken care of from the physical labor side. But meanwhile, you just have the same people just working on making the machines better. And so no wonder it's just so exponential. And so maybe that is one of the major reasons why Canada is being beaten by the USA, because the USA has this massive capital expenditure budget, but then that just makes everything else grow as well.
An accountant with a computer running Microsoft Excel can do the work of 2 accountants using calculators and 5 accountants using their heads. A farm with modern irrigation systems, genetically enhanced crops and modern fertilizers is going to produce much more food on the same acre of land when compared to a farm without these capital advancements. Computers, calculators, fertilizers and irrigation systems are all what economists consider capital. A more simple definition is just stuff that makes stuff. Capital investments make both land and labour more efficient, and this is what Canada is lacking when compared to the United States. As of 2019, Canadian businesses spend $13,000 per worker per year on capital. Again, this could be anything from office chairs to state-of-the-art machines. The US, by contrast, spent $20,500 per worker, or 50% more than Canadian businesses did.
And so that in itself explains such a massive difference right there. I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that Canada is only 30% behind. I mean, I guess they have a massive mining sector, but my goodness, to be spending, I'm going to call it closer to 150% and still only being 30% behind is very, very impressive, I think.
A lot of this is down to financing infrastructure. The US is a hotbed of business investment thanks in large part to its public markets that attract both American and international investors. Canada, of course, has its own public stock exchanges, but they are not nearly as large and don't attract the same type of international investment. Obviously, this is anecdotal, but I personally, as an individual investor, have roughly 1/3 of my total portfolio invested into US companies, despite living in Australia, because the US is just a logical place to invest. It uses the world's reserve currency, it has a very favourable business environment, and it's just so large that it becomes the default choice. This has trickle-down consequences for even non-publicly traded companies in the country. For example, take Bob and Marshall here. Bob owns a construction company in the US, and Marshall owns a construction company in Canada. Both of these company owners want to raise $1 million to buy a new warehouse for their equipment, so they start looking for investors. The American company is much more likely to find it because there is simply more investment capital floating around in America.
And that just comes down to people even knowing about it or not knowing about it in the first place, because yes, the USA has so many things going for it, being the global currency, being the biggest GDP, being all these separate things that make it just an investment haven. And that's why then it's kind of just a compounding effect, because that's the biggest economy, because it has the biggest economy. And so when you finally hear that Canada even has a stock exchange, you go, oh, of course they do. Why would I even think that they wouldn't have it because my country has it, wherever you might be? But at the same time, you go, I've never heard of it before, so I can't be to blame in that regard. And on a completely different note, I would love if anyone can tell me how this city works, because I can only imagine that's a city in the distance and I'm seeing a bridge and every single car in this time lapse goes to the city. And so does no one ever come back? Does the city just devour them? Is there a tunnel to make them come back towards us? Where do they even go?
An initial public offering, or IPO, is when a company's shares are first listed on a public market. A lot of the time, the money raised in these offerings is not actually going to fund anything the company does, but instead it is going to pay back early investors so that they can take their money and reinvest it into more new businesses. This happens on the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange the same as it does on the Toronto Stock Exchange. The difference is that the American markets are proportionately much larger, and therefore there is more liquidity available for businesses of all sizes.
What am I looking at right there? Market capitalization of listed listed domestic companies in 2018. 30.44 trillion. I would have thought that China, for instance, would be, I don't know, bigger than that. Other as well. Even the fact that Japan is somewhat challenging China, that is insane. But then you see Canada down there at 2.82 compared to 45%. That is outrageous.
Given this difference in capital investment between Canada and the US, it's actually remarkable that Canadian workers are able to produce as much as they currently are.
Yeah,
but of course, the
absolutely.
relationship between labour efficiency and capital intensity is not exactly linear. Eventually, a worker is going to have all the tools they need to do their job, and anything else is going to have diminishing returns. So, why does this actually matter?
I'm just going to have to listen to that last sentence again because I completely tuned out and my mind was blown when I saw this guy about to stick his hand in the gear, or that's what it looked like to me. I was going, what is he doing? He's about to get his arm ripped off, but it's just the perspective is all wrong. As look as this, even though it would drastically change the entire video, it's just very, very scary to see someone doing that. And even with the holes spinning around, the triangle holes as well, it was like, oh, there's so many ways that could go so poorly, but my goodness, I'm glad that it didn't.
Eventually, a worker is going to have all the tools they need to do their job, and anything else is going to have diminishing returns.
Okay,
so, why does this actually matter? Most countries in the world have less productive workers than the US. Why isn't it a problem for them? This productivity issue is such a problem for Canada, really, because of the silent rivalry it has with the US. For a video about the economy of Canada, I have spoken a lot about the United States, and I have done this for two reasons. The first is that most of my audience is American, and they tend to lose interest if they're not mentioned every few minutes. But more importantly, Canada has a true economic rivalry with the US.
Yes.
To be clear, Canada and the US are allies. They have very open trade policies, and of course, they are culturally extremely close. But all of this just makes the battle for talent that much more fierce. About 45,000 Canadians move to the United States every year, but despite the constant posts on social media threatening to do as much, only around 9,000 Americans move to Canada.
Right. I understand now. So many things are starting to come together. And I've even seen and heard people talking about that exact thing in the comments. Like, let's take the Avro Arrow, for instance. People have told me so many times that, yep, they shut the entire program down and then they just stole the entire workforce and the entire brains behind the operation. And really, to be honest, it just makes sense when you see some of the other numbers and figures that are spat out in this video. You know, they are 30% more productive, so you're not feeling like you're just in a sluggish workforce. You're also having capital expenditure out the wazoo, let alone the fact that you might go from having $13,000 spent in your year to $20,000, and maybe even your income will increase. There are so many different factors that just make it make sense as to how there can be a 5-to-1 ratio there. And so even though they are two of the closest allies and their cultures are so realistically entwined with one another, it really doesn't stop the fact that Canada has to fight for survival because the USA is such a juggernaut that everyone's first pick is that, and so there's no money flowing into Canada. You know, if you're looking at it and trying to decide which form of symbiotic relationship it would be, it really depends on what you were looking at, because could it be mutualism? Yes. Could it also be parasitism? Yes.
This is simply a decision that most make based on opportunity.
Yeah.
We have already seen that American workers earn more on average, and this is especially true for highly skilled individuals with equally high salaries.
Yep.
Top income earners in Canada can make much more money by moving to the US, and they will also be paying much less tax on that income. Yes, Social Security is not as strong in America, but that doesn't matter very much to high income earners. This brain drain means that Canada consistently suffers from a talent shortage, which it has had to fill with skilled migrants. Now, skilled migration can be a great thing, but there are some side effects. Housing affordability being one of the big ones, especially in Canada, because remember, while it's a big country, most people live in a small handful of metropolitan cities.
Same as
This growth in house prices has been a problem for Canadian cities for the past 2 decades, but it's becoming especially apparent now.
There are so many compounding factors that are working against Canada in this situation. Like I said, they have all these skilled people, but they just immediately leave for flat out better conditions. And then of course they have to try and fill those positions with international workers. And I remember hearing a while ago that Canada was just actively trying to recruit people from Mexico, meanwhile the US had just shut its gates. And so I guess on top of all of the same issues that every single country in the world is facing, be it inflation, recession, whatever you want to call it, they are also having to deal with the competition of the USA trying to get themselves out of that bubble.
Higher land prices also further starve businesses of money that they could be investing into capital. If a business spends more money renting or buying its facilities, it's not going to have as much to spend on staff wages and the tools it needs to add value to the economy. It's also going to make it harder for those businesses to raise money because investors and banks are going to be more drawn to the real estate market rather than the business financing market. Ironically, this housing affordability issue is only exacerbating the problem of skilled Canadians looking to move out of the country to American cities where they can earn more and pay a lot less.
The more you hear about it, the more you really do realize that everything is so interconnected, and it just makes sense that the USA has set themselves up to be #1 in the world because they have so many things going for it that then Canada has to, well, they can't really compete. I was going to say they have to compete, but they can't compete with that.
Now it's time to put Canada on the Economics Explained national leaderboard. Canada is the 8th largest economy in the world with a GDP of $1.64 trillion.
Yep.
So, despite all of the mean stuff I've said in this video, it's still a very heavy hitter, and it gets an 8 out of 10.
Okay.
That strong GDP is spread out over a relatively modest population of 38 million people, giving it a GDP per capita of $43,258 and an 8 out of 10.
Okay.
Stability and confidence is great. Part of the reason that Canada has such expensive real estate is that wealthy people from across the world see it as a safe haven to invest their money.
Right.
It has a strong and stable democratic government and an overall well-managed economy. It gets a 9 out of 10. Growth has not been strong, and according to the OECD's predictions, it's not going to improve anytime soon. Canada has really not seen any nominal GDP growth at all in the past decade, so it gets a 2 out of 10.
Wait. At all in the last decade? I mean, I understand the last couple of years, but in the last decade, no growth. That's, wow, okay, no wonder they're just talking about the next 5.
Finally, industry. Canada does have robust service, financial, mining, and agricultural industries. And while it might be overshadowed on all fronts by its big brother to the south, it's still no slouch on the world stage. It gets a 7 out of 10.
Fair enough.
Altogether, this gives Canada an average score of 6.8 out of 10, putting it here on the Economics Explained national.
Of course they had to go and beat us. Why? Why? By 0.2? Are you kidding me? Now I probably just have to go and watch the Australia video to understand why and how they have beaten us by 0.2. I mean, I can understand the UK because they are a bigger player, and then the Netherlands and New Zealand 7.4. What have they been doing? Their economy isn't as good as ours, or it's nowhere near as big. But really, if they're talking about Canada being the worst performing economy over the next 5 or 4 decades, then I certainly hope that they slip below us, because that means that, well, they're not the worst performing and we're just going to be under the ground. And so trying to remember where everyone is, I'm just going to come back to the start where you show the whole thing. Okay, we're not even that low. New Zealand is quite high, so at least that's going alright. But Ireland, that certainly caught me off guard when I saw that. I mean, I can only assume that he hasn't done one on the USA, because surely they would be somewhere even down here, you know, even if they were somehow below Australia. I can't imagine so, but let's say they were. And considering China and Japan as 8.2 and 7.6 respectively, I can only assume they would be somewhere in that ballpark, considering they are the biggest economy in the world. But look, when you add up all the things that he has said and forecast throughout this entire video, and then you go, hang on a second, we're only number 9 on the entire world scale, you know, under Ireland, sure, under China, sure, under the Netherlands, okay, sure, but either way, you were just above Australia, you were just above Iceland, you were just above all these other countries, like Liechtenstein, Vatican, Spain, for goodness sake, you know, these are massive players really in the world stage, and you're still above them, and so things can't be looking too doomy and gloomy overall. That doesn't mean that there aren't challenges that Canada and really the rest of the world have to face, and then also specific challenges that Canada has to face, but either way, overall, I don't think they're going to be just regressing, they're just going to have the slowest growth, maybe. But anyway, in saying that, I reckon I'm going to call it there, so thank you for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, feel free to do the YouTube algorithm things down below. Also, if this is the first video of mine that you're watching, then make sure to go check out any other ones I've done. Also, make sure to go check out the original awesome video down in the description below, or hey, maybe even just want to consider subscribing so that you don't miss another one of these in the future. But all in all, have a good one and see ya.